How do entrepreneurs manage risk? So risk is defined online as expose someone or something valued to danger, harm, or loss. Sounds easy enough, right? The problem is, the biggest reason for businesses going bust isn't lack of ideas. It isn't not working hard or smart enough. It is managing risk. What risks aren't managed? Cash flow risk. What is the biggest threats to cash flow? High costs and lack of sales. What is one of the risks of lack of sales and revenue? Focusing on just one market. And yet countless people focus on just one market instead of numerous markets, despite the online space making it easier to be international now. Health risk. Does the business depend on your health? Political and social risks, linked to not just being in one country. If a radical government gets elected, will your business go bust? What is the biggest mistake I see? There are 2 to 1. Confusing lack of volatility and stability. I have a friend who made over $200K in Indonesia, focusing on an expat niece for 15 to 20 years. Suddenly, in 2015, expats weren't getting visas renewed due to changing government regulations and oil price collapses. His business went down by 85% within 12 to 24 months. He couldn't understand it. But Adam, this business has been stable for 20 years. No, his business wasn't volatile for 20 years. It only took 1 to 2 events to change the situation. So his business was never stable. Another person, who was making the same amount of money from 20 to 30 countries, faces lower risk. If one county goes wrong, maybe that is 0.1% to 15% of revenue. Most likely 5%. 2. Not having private investments. Businesses are often linked to our health and they are liquid assets. You can't find a buyer quickly in most cases. So having a pool of money just in case we want to retire or get sick, makes sense. So not depending on one revenue source is key, say Facebook ads, emailing marketing or whatever, nor one country. Your plan doesn't have much risk, Jim said to me. I had just finished going through our pitch. We were meeting at Pete's in downtown Los Altos. It was the ultimate insult. You're a startup, right? You're supposed to be taking obscene risks. This wasn't the first time I had heard something like that. Other potential investors had accused us of financial engineering because of our initial strategy of second sourcing existing products. Another famous investor said our plan was too sane for his fund. Ouch. Why take risks unless you have to? Our thought process was pretty simple. We were following a proven entry strategy that had been followed by many successful companies in our industry. AMD, Linear Technology, Maxim, where I learned it, and National Semiconductor had all started the same way. It seemed obvious that our risk-averse strategy was a great way to go. But investors saw it differently. Investors who hadn't seen our strategy before didn't get it. That's why it wasn't a surprise that one of our 2 investors was previously an investor in Maxim and the other was a founder of National Semiconductor and an investor in Linear Technology. Your investor makeup may or may not push you to take more risks. Once we got funded, we had a plan of hiring 10 design engineers, then holding our headcount flat until we saw revenue growth. I remember one of our investors, Raul, asking me why we were holding our headcount flat. I explained that we wanted to see traction before we increased our burn rate. Raul replied, "Don't worry, we will support you." It sounds great, doesn't it? Except Raul left one part out, and that part is, until we decide not to support you anymore. In other words, increase your risk at your own risk. What did we do? We added headcount and increased our risk by reducing our runway. How did it turn out? That's another story. When you bootstrap, you think about risk differently than when you get venture funding. Maybe it's just the bootstrapped entrepreneurs that I've worked with, but their thought process is much different than most venture-funded entrepreneurs. Bootstrapped entrepreneurs have a finite amount of money to make their company a success. So most bootstrapped entrepreneurs don't take unnecessary risks. Bootstrapped entrepreneurs don't know if they ever will get more funding. And even if they raise a small amount of funding, they usually remain risk-averse. You can be risk-averse and grow fast. Webster's definition of an entrepreneur is one who organizes, manages, and assumes the risks of a business or enterprise. Nowhere in the definition is anyone telling you should take crazy risks. Obviously, starting any business means you're taking a risk. However, why not take smart, calculated risks instead of shooting for the moon risks? I worked with Greg on and off for over 20 years. Greg is one of the most talented engineers I've ever worked with. Greg was always coming up with ideas for new technologies and architectures that had the potential to disrupt an industry segment. I loved working with Greg because he pushed us forward. Simplicity brings huge returns. What I learned from working with Greg is you can move an industry and not take outsized risks. Greg's designs were always elegant and simple. And they were always groundbreaking. Another entrepreneur I'm working with now, Ray, has an idea that has the potential to disrupt a whole industry. The technology is unbelievably simple, minimizing risk all the way. Elegance many times equals disruption.